The Wild West, separating truth from Hollywood. The Wild West. A land of cowboys and outlaws, of shootouts at high noon, and legendary lawmen bringing justice to the frontier. At least, that's the Hollywood version. The truth? The real Wild West was far stranger, more diverse, and far deadlier than the movies ever showed. Cowboys weren't just white men. Picture a cowboy, and you probably think of John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, or a rugged white rancher riding into the sunset. But in reality, 1 out of every 4 cowboys in the West was black. Many were former slaves who found freedom on the open range, becoming some of the toughest cattle wranglers and gunfighters of their time. Then there were the vaqueros, the Mexican cowboys who taught the Americans how to ride, rope, and herd cattle in the first place, and the native cowboys who lived between 2 worlds, adapting old traditions to the new frontier. The real West wasn't a white man's world. It was a melting pot of cultures, skills, and survival. The Lone Ranger was a black man. Bass Reeves, the real Lone Ranger. Born into slavery, he escaped into Indian Territory, learned the ways of the land, and returned as a U.S. Marshal. Over 3,000 arrests. Outlaws feared him. Judges trusted him. He rode a white horse, wore disguises, and handed down justice like a living legend. But Hollywood couldn't handle a black hero in the early 20th century, so they rewrote history, stripped his identity, and gave us a white Lone Ranger instead. Gunslingers didn't have shootouts at high noon. Duel at high noon, pacing off in the middle of the street, that's pure Hollywood. In the real Wild West, gunfights were brutal, fast, and ugly. Most happened in crowded saloons, dark alleyways, or over a card game gone wrong. And the most famous gunfight, the OK Corral, wasn't a drawn-out duel. It lasted just 30 seconds. 30 seconds of sheer chaos between lawmen and outlaws, leaving 3 men dead, and the legend of Wyatt Earp burned into history. Women were just as tough as the men. The West wasn't just built by cowboys and outlaws. Women held it together. Some were gunslingers, like Calamity Jane and Belle Starr. Others were ranchers, saloon owners, or even undercover spies. They fought, rode, and ruled towns just like the men. Annie Oakley could outshoot most lawmen. Mary Fields, better known as Stagecoach Mary, was the first black woman to carry the U.S. mail, armed to the teeth and ready to fight off bandits at a moment's notice. The West had no rules about who could survive. Only the strongest did. The real law of the West: outlaws ran the show. The movies liked to paint sheriffs as the heroes, but in reality, many lawmen were just as corrupt as the criminals they hunted. Billy the Kid, he wasn't just an outlaw. He worked as a hired gun for crooked sheriffs. Jesse James, he started as a Confederate guerrilla fighter, robbing trains and banks in a personal war against the North. The West wasn't law and order. It was survival of the fittest. The fastest gun, the smartest thief, or the toughest ranger won the day. Justice, that was a matter of opinion. The West was more dangerous than Hollywood admits. Hollywood loves to show cowboys fighting Indians, but the real Wild West was violent for everyone. Outlaws robbed trains. Native tribes fought to survive against government expansion. The U.S. cavalry wiped out entire villages. Towns were burned, ranches raided, and justice often came at the end of a rope. And disease, deadlier than any gunfight, a simple infection, a rattlesnake bite, or a brutal winter could kill just as fast as a bullet. There was no safety net, just raw survival. The Wild West didn't die. It evolved. By the early 1900s, the frontier was gone. Railroads stretched across the country. Native lands were taken, and cowboys were replaced by barbed wire and businessmen. But the legend of the Wild West, that was just beginning. Hollywood rewrote history. Cowboys became heroes. The truth was polished, cleaned up, and sold to America as an adventure story. The real West? It faded into the past, buried beneath myths and movie magic. But out there, in the deserts of Texas, in the mountains of Montana, in the ghost towns of Arizona, if you listen close, you can still hear the echoes of the real Wild West.